We were on the preamble to the Bill of Rights. And most people are not aware there is a preamble to the Bill of Rights. And we learned in that preamble, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of the clauses, or abuse of the Constitution, further declaratory clauses were added. And now that's where we left off. If we call the Bill of Rights a declaration of prohibitions, let's look at why that's a practical way to describe the bill. The First Amendments start out with phrases like these: Congress shall make no law. Now, is that granting a right, or is that a prohibition? That's a prohibition. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Did the government grant us the right to keep and bear arms? No, we already have that right. We're making the federal government aware that we will not allow them to infringe upon the right. No soldier shall, this is a prohibition, shall not be violated. No person shall be held, and so forth. This is the reason why we would suggest you think of this in terms of prohibitions rather than rights that are being granted. I added this because last week in American Heritage School, one of the participants asked a question and said, did the Bill of Rights apply to the states? And I was stammering and stuttering in my brain trying to remember where was the case when the federal government started applying the Bill of Rights to the states. And after the question's over and I'm on my way home, it was the Gitlow Doctrine. In 1925, the Supreme Court decided that portions of the Bill of Rights applied to the states. They didn't discover that until 1925. Now, all of the previous Supreme Courts didn't discover that. But in 1925, they said, and they started naming which parts apply to the states. Now, you can read a more detailed account in The Making of America, a book that I worked on many years ago. Look up the Gitlow Doctrine in the index, and it'll take you right to it, give you the full story. The original intent, the answer to the question is, did the Bill of Rights apply to the states? No. Now, last week I said, I can't remember, and that's where my brain started working on the Gitlow Doctrine and other related material. The Bill of Rights came about as a product of the anti-federalist. Their great concern was that the Constitution would become a consolidated government and it would be abused. And they wanted to spell out more specifically how to protect the people. And that's where the Bill of Rights came from. And I will stand up now with my shoulders back and I will say, no, the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states until the courts began inventing the application in the Gitlow Doctrine of 1925. That's where I am. That's my position. Original intent is present intent. We talk about original intent. Well, original means it's going to stay the same till the present time. In this book, he has a section called The Irrelevance of Original Intent. Now, this is an author, a lawyer writing the book. He says the original intent is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the contract meant in the old days. All that matters is what we think it means today. And so they reinvent the contract. They don't even call it a contract, and certainly not a contract between the states. Where are we today? The government. Now this is this crazy microphone is bothering me here today. The government, remember the diagram we had from Bernard Jen and Sage's book, where he showed how things were before the war on the states? This is how things were in the year 1878 when he wrote the book. The government at that time had achieved absolute supremacy. They told us what the Constitution means. The Constitution was over the administrative agencies called states. And then the people were subject to all of that. This is his diagram out of his 1878 history book of the United States. Well, guess what? It hasn't changed since then. This is still a diagram showing what our government's doing to us today. What did I read from the government website showing what the Supreme Court's responsibilities are? They tell us what the Constitution means, and the only way that can be changed is if the Supreme Court changes their mind. Absolute supremacy. How is it that in 1788 the states were in the top grade of authority, and in 1866 found them in the third grade of authority? The short answer. In the convention, and this is me again, this is Stephen Pratt's condensation of reading. In a convention in Philadelphia in 1866, the new national government announced, or it should say federal, shouldn't it? See, we converted from a federal government to a national government over a short period of time. The new national government announced its absolute supremacy. The government was now over the Constitution and would tell the states what the Constitution means. The states would be merely administrative agencies for the new central power. Coerced by bloodshed and violence, the people were now involuntary subjects of this new system. One nation, indivisible. Last night somebody come up and says, "Oh, isn't that in the pledge to the flag?" Yes. Yeah, who wrote the pledge? Well, I don't know. A socialist named Jeremy Bellamy. He wrote the pledge after this war on the southern states, and he put into that what the theme of government was at that time. It was one nation indivisible, will crush you if you try to secede. Am I telling the truth? I am. Salt Lake Tribune, January 26, 2010. I like this news story. Governor Gary Herbert urges the federal government to keep their noses out of our lives and our pocketbooks. The continued encroachment of the federal government into our businesses, our lives, and our pocketbooks must be challenged. Those are the words quoted from the governor of the state of Utah. At some time, the states have got to say no more. The states have got to say, look, federal government, you have an important and significant role, but you can't step over the states to do it. And that was a nice statement from the governor. Well done. Today we have a presidency fit for a king. We have supremacist judges who pretend they are interpreting the Constitution. And we have congressmen and senators who take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. A Congress that does not seem to have the faintest conception of the type of government once known as the American Republic. This is where we are today, with one exception. What's that exception? Ron Paul. What a great hero. This last voting record, there are several agencies that publish voting records. The latest voting record published that there were like 41 members of the House of Representatives who voted just like Ron Paul. 41 got 100% in support of the Constitution. But the editor of the magazine, The New American, that publishes this record said, don't get too excited. They're not supporting the Constitution. They're voting against the Democrats. Many of the scholars of the past are long since forgotten. This is one of those forgotten scholars that made a great contribution in early American thinking. His name was St. George Tucker. He wrote this law book in the year 1803, View of the Constitution of the United States. Power, when undefined, soon becomes unlimited. It is necessary to the preservation of a free government that every man should know his rights. It is also indispensably necessary that he should be able on all occasions to refer to them. And I added, in the written contract. You should be able to refer to your rights in the written contract. How do I know that the Supreme Court is feeding me false propaganda? I know it because it says in the contract what their duties and responsibilities are and what the restrictions are on the Supreme Court. I would be glad to show that to any of the justices that would like to know. I'm afraid they aren't knocking on my door asking my opinion. And this is the ending of this lesson that we started before lunch. It's that beautiful illustration. I find it beautiful. There are some critics that like to criticize it, but I find it beautiful. As the artist John McNaughton puts Jesus Christ as the center point of this illustration about our country. And there Jesus Christ is holding the Constitution. And This left-hand corner, these people down here are the good people of America. And they're looking to their Savior. And they're looking to the great freedom document that provides the greatest blessings that people can enjoy of peace and prosperity on the earth today. Over on the right, we have the people sorrowful, some of them, except for the lawyer that's gloating over counting his money down here, right? They're counting his money. These are the people who have made bad mistakes. They've made bad choices. They're not bad people. They just made some bad choices that caused great harm and destruction. For example, the front one right here, this is a Supreme Court justice. And on the original painting, you can see the bills, and you can see the names on the bills. Roe versus Wade is one of them, and there were a number of others where the Supreme Court made poor choices. Well, we're not going to sing right now, but if we did sing, it would be this hymn. We're going to find the end of this lesson. It's a great story. We won't tell it right now. This is the story of John Newton. Let me find the next lesson so we can finish our day out with one more lesson. I'm going to have to flip over here to escape. And we're going to go to Documents, right here. And we're now going to do, oh dear. Do you know what cognitive dissonance is? Have you learned that word, cognitive dissonance? It means the truth hurts. Yeah, you heard the word last night, but we're going to hear it again. We're going to start this lesson. We're going to give you the whole lesson. Oh dear, if we do that, I've got to go open up some slides that I've blanked out. Oh, yeah. If I'm going to give you the whole lesson, I've got to start here. And now we've got to roll down through here. You will be amazed at what these slides are. I blanked them out of the last message because I didn't have time. Today we have time. Let's go to right here. We're going to push down on Shift. Hit that one. Hit right-click. Hit Hide Slide. Now they're back in the lesson again. There's 35 slides that we're going to add that nobody got to see last week. Okay, now we're going to go down to, I don't know what else I blanked out. I try and see what we get. No, we don't want to start there. Okay, 3 years ago I didn't know how to do this at all. I was just totally illiterate, computer illiterate. I didn't even know what that little symbol right there was. I got it figured out now. Okay, let's try that. New lesson. Okay. Confronting our history. Now, I picked that word on purpose. Confrontation is not a friendly thing. When we confront our history, we're actually looking at our history with what do we want to describe? A more aggressive look than what we look at it in American history in high school, for example. We're going to confront some of the issues that have had an effect on our country and the direction we've gone. And some of them are not friendly, they're not good. But they happen, they really happen. Here, for example, not far from my house is a herd of horses. My friend Neil, he is the one that takes care of the horses. And one day I says, Neil, how are you doing? What have you been doing for a living lately? Oh, he says, I'm feeding horses. Yeah, I feed Shoshone horses. Shoshone horse? Tell me what's going on. Well, it seems that the federal government confiscated several hundred Shoshone horses and they needed to put them somewhere, and so I'm feeding them. I says, you got a stallion? It sounds like a lifetime's work, see? Feeding these horses. Yeah, he said he has a stallion. They reproduce every year, and it's his career. These Shoshone horses are the story for the first portion of the lesson. We're telling a series. We have a series of lessons, and they'll all be covered this week and next week. Okay, there we go. Here's the book that we're going to start with. Habits of Empire. A History of American Expansion by Walter Nugent in 2008. Now, this is a very well-written book, written by a scholar that's qualified to do good history. Habits of Empire. What is an empire? Now, we're going to confront this right now. Do we want to be an empire? Do we want to be the great American empire? Kind of like Rome. No, we don't want to be an empire. An empire is a group of states or territories under one absolute sovereign power or authority. Are we there today? Yes, we are. That's the level of government we have today. A view of the Constitution of the United States in 1803, The Wisdom of St. George Tucker. And in a later book, The New Views of the Constitution of the United States in 1823 by John Taylor of Caroline. That's how they always said his name. These two books were law textbooks. They're valuable reading in understanding that time period. Here's another law textbook, A View of the Constitution by William Rawle in 1825. These men are qualified scholars. They loved freedom. They loved the great principles of the Founding Fathers. In fact, William Rawle was there with the Founding Fathers. William Rawle was a skilled lawyer that George Washington used on several occasions and eventually invited William Rawle to be the Attorney General of the United States. So William Rawle was that quality of lawyer. He was on the side of George Washington. Okay, A View of the Constitution, The Republic of Republics. Bernard Janin Sage is another lawyer. Can any good come from lawyers? Yes, there are good lawyers. Here are four of them. Bernard Janin Sage was a lawyer. During the war we call the Civil War, he was an interesting character because he was one of the attorneys that was going to defend Jefferson Davis in the greatest trial of the century that never happened. Now, this is a weird bit of history that we generally don't hear. I don't usually stop and tell the story, but I'm going to tell it today. Bernard Janin Sage was preparing to defend Jefferson Davis. Now, remember, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederation, the southern states, and Jefferson Davis was captured after the Civil War. He was treated very ignorantly. He was thrown into prison ignorantly. He was abused, not physically beaten, but he was abused with things like they would leave the lights on all day, whatever that does, a kerosene lantern at night. Leave the lights on. They would march back and forth in front of his cell to aggravate him all the time, marching back and forth, clicking their feet. Abuse. Months went by, and they still couldn't figure out what to charge him for. What crime had he committed? No charges, just held in prison. Months went by, and finally, they started treating him nicer because they discovered they couldn't get the local lawyers to take the case. The North, I'm talking about the Union, the North couldn't find a lawyer that would take the case because each time they got the highest paid, best quality lawyer money could buy, the lawyers would look at the case and then say, I won't touch it because you'll lose. Huh? Yeah, you'll lose. You'll go to court, and they're going to prove in court that the North was wrong and the South was right. And I won't take the case. Finally, after going through 2 or 3 lawyers, they finally gave up and they said to Jefferson Davis, we're going to give you a pardon. I won't accept a pardon. I want to go to court. I want my day in court, and we'll show you that you're wrong. And most people have never heard this before. It isn't in the official literature. And so Jefferson Davis demanded a trial, and they refused to give him one. Finally, they just opened the door and said, get out, we won't feed you anymore, and turned him loose. 2 years he spent in prison with no charges and was finally given his freedom. Could not get a day in court. That's Jefferson Davis. Bernard Janin Sage is one of the attorneys that had prepared the case to beat the North. It's an interesting bit of history. I thought you'd like that part. Between 1825 and 1878, something terrible happened in America. The government began conquering the country. Now, there's a difference between the government and the country. The government began conquering the country. What do we mean by that? In Richard Maybury's books, he defines patriotism. Dedication to the inspired principles on which the country was founded, and a willingness to stand firm and fight for these principles, regardless of what the government says or does. Now, I like that definition. If the government's not following natural law, if they're violating the laws of nature and of nature's God, I'm not going to support my government. I'm going to support the laws of nature and of nature's God. And so that's what he's trying to explain here. Somebody more famous declared, my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or its office holders. We're going to support the great principles of freedom on which the country is founded, not the office holders, unless they follow the principles of freedom. There was a terrible dispute going on in 1787. By the way, we're going to come back to the Indian horses. We're going to get those into the story here. Excuse me, In 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, the Convention of States, 2 of the prominent men, George Mason and James Madison, had a disagreement. And each had their own backers that were supporting them in this debate. The debate was over how should vote for tariffs be passed. George Mason said we should require Congress have a 2/3 majority. He argued that if we don't have a 2/3 majority, the taxes will be violated, and the South will be run over by the North. And James Madison said, oh, no, just a simple majority is all that's necessary. So they debated this on and on. Finally, they went with the James Madison viewpoint, and they put taxation into the Constitution, and only a simple majority was required. This is what it says. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, and imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. And all they had to have was a simple majority to get this passed. All duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States, wrote Alexander Hamilton. And in his edition, in his writing, he emphasized in capital letters the word uniform. Uniform. In Hamilton's Curse, written in 2008 by Thomas DiLorenzo, I enjoy the book very much, good reading. He wrote the book in response to another book that I enjoyed very much called Hamilton's Blessing. And it was written 10 years earlier. In this book, we read about the New York State Ratifying Convention. Now, it was in the ratifying conventions where the intent of the Constitution was debated. And in this particular state, Alexander Hamilton was at the convention trying to urge the people to support the Constitution. And he declared, and I have read this in the original, I've read the entire speech, and this is not out of context, even though you notice the quotation marks start halfway through the sentence. The United States Congress would never contemplate marching the troops of one state into the bosom of another for any reason. Huh? What's that saying? The United States Congress would never contemplate marching the troops of one state into the bosom of another for any reason? Have we ever done that? Oh, we did, yeah, and murdered and killed and butchered and burned and destroyed. Terrible. Well, what's he talking about here? Where do you get this far out nonsense? Well, hang on, I'm going to give you two examples of where his reasoning came from. This is the first one. Now, I'm a researcher, I'm a reader. I wouldn't want to call myself a scholar, but I know how to read. And it wasn't a month ago, let's back up, 10 or 15 years ago, I went to a printer's convention. I'm a specialist in old-fashioned printing history. And somebody handed me this hand-printed book. It's a little booklet of 28 pages, and his name is Peter. Peter from Williamsburg, Virginia, prints this book on his old-fashioned printing press to demonstrate how old books were printed. It's a historic reprint of an original book printed in 1774. I thought Thomas Jefferson was coming up, but he didn't. Printed in 1774, and Thomas Jefferson was the author, and he was expressing the feelings of the delegates of the House of Burgesses as they were preparing to call Congress into session, the First Continental Congress. In this, we mentioned this last night, I'll go over it very quickly. In this particular document, resolved that it be an instruction to the said deputies, when assembled in General Congress with the deputies from the other states of British America, to propose to the said Congress that an humble and dutiful address be presented to His Majesty, begging leave to lay before him, as Chief Magistrate of the British Empire, the united complaints of His Majesty's subjects in America. Now, we pointed out last night, Congress is used, and states. States of British America. Now, this is significant. The interesting thing is this lay in my files for 10 or 15 years before I bothered to read it. And I sat down a week or so going, wow, this is good stuff. We defined Congress last night, and we know that they're now using states as a description of these colonies, states of British America. He uses it over and over in this document. His Majesty has no right. In the document we read further, His Majesty has no right to land a single armed man on our shores at any time without the consent of their legislature. This is in 1774. What was Alexander Hamilton arguing in 1788? Same thing. He said that the states will not be invaded by the federal government. Now, he said under any condition. Well, Thomas Jefferson said without the consent of their legislature. This is what went into the Constitution, this version right here. Now, that was Thomas Jefferson. I got my slide made backwards. Here's what it says in the Constitution. The United States government shall protect each of the states against invasion. Now, that part right there is important right now. The United States government has not done that. Arizona has taken this upon themselves to protect themselves since the federal government won't do their job. This is the requirement of the federal government to protect states against invasion. But don't stop there. And on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. The key word here is on application. Can the federal government march troops into any state just indiscriminately? No. The state has to invite them. They have to have permission of the free, sovereign, independent state before they can come in and beat up, trounce on, or do whatever they had in mind. The state must invite them to come in. That's called state sovereignty. Without that, you have no sovereignty. That's an interesting bit. In 1792, there was a whiskey tax. Lay the blame for this on Alexander Hamilton. The whiskey tax was 25%, pretty steep tax. The farmers in Pennsylvania said this is unfair. They're not taxing cotton in the southern states. They're not taxing other products of agriculture. Why are they taxing whiskey? Oh, because people drink whiskey and it's a luxury. You don't need whiskey. And the argument was kind of like all of you would give today. I don't think we probably have very many whiskey drinkers in here. And so, oh yeah, let's tax those people that drink whiskey. Well, whiskey wasn't just a drink. Whiskey was money. It was the farmers in western Pennsylvania that grew grain, and because it was so difficult to transport the grain to market, they distilled it into whiskey. And then they could take these smaller containers and put them on a wagon and haul them to market over the mountains and trade it for other commodities. They weren't trying to drink up a big storm. And they said it's unfair. The tax was not uniform throughout the United States. Now, did we not read in the Constitution it was to be uniform throughout the United States? Yeah, well, it's not, they said. For 2 years, these farmers in western Pennsylvania tried to get uniformity. The federal government did not listen to them. We're talking about George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and others of that period. They finally decided, just like Arizona decided, there's enough is enough. We'll not tolerate this. We will stop the tax from being collected. They hadn't paid any yet anyway. And so they hung notices up on the trees around entering western Pennsylvania that said, don't bother to come in here because if you do, we'll run you out. Tax collectors. Now, the tax collectors were called excisemen. In 1794, the excisemen attempted to come in and collect the tax, and they ran them out. And so this old illustration shows them tarring and feathering an exciseman. It was a rough, tumble society. So they chased them off. Well, meanwhile, let's not go to that one quite yet. See where we are on this. Oh, it's okay. At the same time period, this same ruling, I bring this in Utah because there are so many people that are members of the Mormon faith that they heard the story over and over about Martin Van Buren being a bum. Well, maybe he was. But he wasn't a bum because of what he said. You remember what I'm going to put on the screen? Your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you. What's this all about? Well, there was violence going on in the state of Missouri. A certain representative of that church, Joseph Smith, went to the president and asked for help. And the president responded, is he telling the truth? You just learned that he is. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says the president has no authority to go into a state without an invitation from the state legislature or the governor if the legislature's not in session. What was the governor doing in Missouri? He was the villain. He was the bad guy. So he wasn't about to ask the president to come in and put down the violence. I found this really interesting as I reviewed this bit of history. So I added that slide for Utah audiences. Does the president have the authority to call forth the militia to quell violence? Does he? He can call forth the militia. No, that's not even true. Congress has the authority to call forth the militia. But they delegated it to the president. Clear back then. Can Congress delegate a power that we've delegated to them? If I delegate to you the power to run my cash register in my business and then I leave, and you decide you don't like the job, and can you delegate it to somebody else without my permission? No, you can't delegate a delegated power. But they did. They had already delegated it to the president. Violations of the Constitution began a long time ago. Article 1, Section 8 reads, Congress shall have power to provide for calling forth the militia to suppress insurrections and invasions. Does that mean they can enter a sovereign state to try and crush violence without the state inviting them? No, they can't. They can call forth the militia, but they must have permission to enter the state. All of this has been long since divided, thrown away, thrown out. Is Congress vested with authority to send the militia into a state without an application from the state legislature or the governor? The answer is no, they're not vested with that power. John Tyler and Dorr's rebellion in Rhode Island in 1841. The governor of Rhode Island asked for military forces to quell violence. But John Tyler was reluctant to send forces when, in his view, no insurrection existed. This president was a wise president. Here the state, through their governor, invited the president to come in with power, and he refused to go in. He says, let's negotiate instead. And so they negotiated and peacefully resolved the problem. This man was a wise president. May Congress delegate a vested power? No, still no. It was no a few minutes ago, too. See if you're consistent. Meanwhile, 40 years after Mason-Madison controversy of 1787, by majority vote, the North imposed protective tariffs. Now, what is a protective tariff? It's a heavy tariff to try and restrict imports from other countries. We're going to protect American business. These American manufacturers that make scissors and needles and cloth and other products that we all want to use, they need protection. So any scissors, needles, and cloth that come in from foreign countries, we're going to put a 47% tariff on them. You can't bring them into the country without paying a big, heavy tax. That's called a protective tariff. In contrast to a revenue tariff. A revenue tariff is a small tariff, a modest fee to try and raise some revenue to pay for federal expenses. For example, the Tariff of Abominations of 1828 placed a tax as high as 47% on some imports. We're going through history rapidly. We're covering history from 1823 to 1940 here. So I just dumping on things as we go along. We're switching subjects now, is what we're doing. They just switch subjects. Now this one we were on, this was the cause of South Carolina determining to nullify the Tariff Act because they said it was not uniform, it was unfair, and they said we won't pay it. Remember that bit of history? And the nullification of South Carolina caused the North, Andrew Jackson, to declare, "Why, if you don't pay your tax, I'll march the army and it will force you to." Did he have any authority to do that? No. Now this is not the official literature. I'm simply presenting what it tells in the story of the past when you read the old documents and the actual records. This is fascinating history. Here's another one fascinating. Lindsay Robertson, in the year 2005, published this book, Conquest by Law, How the Discovery of America Dispossessed Indigenous Peoples of Their Lands. Now, indigenous peoples is a big word for what? Indians. How the Indians were dispossessed of their lands. It seems that Lindsay Robertson was another lawyer. He was in a library in the East and he was studying Indian case. He was a specialist in Indian law. And he came across a statement in the library records that said, there is an original record of all of the court case of 1823, where the Supreme Court decided the case of Johnson versus McIntosh. Oh boy, he thought, an original record, that's primary source. And so he went to the librarian and he asked for that original source, and she looked in the records and said, well, it was given back to the owner. Well, where does the owner live? He lives in England. Oh, Did he come to get it himself? No. Who came and got it? His son. Where does he live? Next door. So he went to well, it wasn't exactly next door, but it was right there in the same neighborhood. So he went to the son, who was a cabinet maker, and the son says, oh yes, I have the box, I've never looked in it. No, I never went through the papers. It's down my basement. So here in a big trunk, they have all of the original records of a court case from 1823. This is primary source material. So Lindsay Robertson went through the files, and he wrote a book on it. And here's what he discovered. Can you see the front cover of this book? We have the Europeans coming over in their boat right here, and we have the indigenous inhabitants of America, the Indians, over here. Who owns the land? Oh, somebody in the audience last week said, well, the Indians didn't own anything. They didn't claim ownership to anything. But does that mean that we can just come in and say we own it? Well, this is what the court case did. They answered the question, who owns the land? This is John Marshall. This is the court in 1823. Now these people, they arrived and they declared, in the name of our sovereign king, we claim ownership of this land we discovered. Okay. Did they really discover it? Well, it was new to them. Did they really own it? Is this question worth discussing? Confronting our history requires we look at this. What about the Native Americans that lived here for centuries? What right did they have on the land? This was their home. They'd been here long before these Europeans landed. John Marshall, Chief Justice, 1801. He was a consolidationist and a Hamiltonian nationalist. He was the judicial counterpart of Alexander Hamilton. Johnson versus McKinnish in 1823, as reported by Lindsay Robertson from primary source material. He concluded about 7 points. John Marshall was guided by his own self-interest. And when John Marshall made his ruling, he ruled in favor of the European. He ruled in favor of the big landowners. Who owns the land? Well, my buddies do. These buddies of mine, and I have an interest in it too. So he's going to be gaining some benefit, financial benefit, along with his buddies gaining financial benefit. So Robertson concluded Marshall was guided by his own self-interest. Marshall made a tragic mistake. He invented the discovery doctrine. Now, the discovery doctrine, political catastrophe it was for the Native Americans. It contributed to the evolution of judicial lawmaking. Remember, we're talking about the judges making bad decisions and its Darwinian evolution of the law, the rule of lawmakers, political law. And then he concluded intelligent people can sometimes unthinkingly create catastrophic problems they find themselves powerless to fix. So these intelligent people like John Marshall and a long list of other intelligent, prominent men. I don't know of any prominent women that made bad choices, but prominent men did it often. They do things they can't fix. This is the discovery doctrine. They announced this in 1823. Upon discovery of the continent, European sovereigns acquired title to all discovered lands, while indigenous peoples retained only an occupancy right that could be transferred only to the same discovering sovereigns. Now, does that sound like a nice, fair decision to make? What is the consequence of this decision? Well, it's devastating. And you're going to find out those Shoshone horses on the first slide. They're a result of the discovery doctrine. Today, right? My neighbor's down there feeding these horses today. 1823 is when this began. Well, because of the discovery doctrine, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Indian Removal Act gave the government the power to drive the Indians where they wanted. This is one of the famous paintings, and they call this painting the Trail of Tears. I had an Uncle Sam up in the corner. He's overseeing what's going on. Big, fat, obese Uncle Sam. Remember, the name of this lesson is Rise to Empire. Rise to empire, where the consolidated central government has a huge power and control over other countries, our country and other countries of the world, and it's beginning clear back here. Trail of Tears was only one of many trails of tears. The rise of domestic empire was going on. General John Pope, 1862, he's in Minnesota, and the Indians in Minnesota are Sioux Indians, and they have been driven onto reservations. They have been promised food and promised large quantities of money for the land that the government has just confiscated from them. In other words, the government made a treaty with them. The government didn't keep the treaty. They didn't send them the food and they didn't pay them. Eventually, the Indians rose up in rebellion and left the reservation and started killing people. They went on the warpath. Who violated the treaty? Well, General Pope, he announces in 1862, "It is my purpose to utterly exterminate the Sioux. They are to be treated as maniacs or wild beasts, and by no means as people with whom treaties or compromises can be made." So he treats them as wild maniacs. Vengeance hanging, Mankato, Minnesota. The year is, what's the year? Well, it's right there with Pope, 1862. The President of the United States was the commander-in-chief over Pope. This is an illustration showing what was going on. This is the hanging platform. They're going to have the biggest mass hanging in the history of the United States. 38 Indians were hung simultaneously by one rope being cut. Must have been very dramatic. These are the audience. All these thousands of people around here are the audience that comes to watch this vengeance hanging. They're going to discipline these Indians for the bad choices that they made when they left the reservation. Ordered that the 38 Indians and half-breeds sentenced to be hanged by the military commission be done on Friday, the 26th of December, 1862. And they did it. Now let's go to another segment of the lesson. The Lost Civilization of North America is a DVD available in 2009. Any of you seen it? Oh, okay, good. A few hands out there. I quite enjoyed it. But as I was watching, it came to me, my mind, not insignificant, a small part, I'll say, of the message was about the treatment of the Indians. Let's take a look at that one. This is coming from this DVD. Intellectually inferior savages, or created equal to other children of God. What are they? Are these intellectually inferior savages, or are they equal to other children of God? This was a choice or a question raised in the 1860s, and that time period, even before that, in the United States. Here's a man, one of the great preachers of the time. He believed the Indians were children of God and went forth to try and teach them the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, my great-great-grandfather was one man like this. His name was Parley P. Pratt. And he went out to try and teach the Indians the gospel of Jesus Christ. He believed they were children of God and needed to be shared, have this message shared with them. Roger Williams, founder of the First Baptist Church in America, believed they were children of God. He declared they are probably of Jewish descent, of the lost tribes of Israel. Now, he concluded that a long time ago, as he worked with the Indians. Artifacts confirmed that the Indians had a tie to ancient Israel. Numerous artifacts. Now, this is in this movie, The Lost Civilization of North America, as they document with the evidence what I'm showing you briefly here. Joseph Smith translated an ancient record from the Lost Civilization which revealed the Israelite origin of the Native Americans. That he believed they were children of God and needed to be taught the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Catholic fathers believed they were children of God and believed they needed to be taught the gospel of Jesus Christ. However, that was not something that was comfortable with the manifest destiny concept. There was a concept being taught that America had a manifest destiny, that it was supposed to cover the whole, from Atlantic to Pacific Ocean, and they had to get rid of the Indians to do that. So if you'll all quietly stand up and let those that are sleeping sleep, that would be okay. This is Saturday afternoon. It's okay to sleep. But I know it's hard. If you want to stand up, feel free to. I won't come over and say, don't sleep on the front row. I'm not about to do that. Okay. Bless your hearts for trying. Feel free to stand up if you want to move to the back and pace around. I pace around because that keeps me awake. Otherwise, I'd be asleep too. This is an illustration showing the concept of manifest destiny, which was abused. Yes, we have a manifest destiny. It's the 28th principle of liberty of the 5,000-year league. But the manifest destiny is to take freedom and peace and happiness to the world, not oppression and misery, not to anyone. In this case, they're driving the Indians ahead of them. However, using the doctrine of manifest destiny, the United States government treated the Indians as inferior savages. This is an illustration from that time period, Uncle Sam's pet, hands off, and it shows Uncle Sam out here feeding the Indians. This war president, in a progressive democracy, now that word ties in with last night's lesson. The year here is 1847. The president is James Polk. He was one of the worst presidents America ever had, and he is part of progressive democracy. Notice his sword. Can you see what it says on it? Manifest destiny, and blood dripping off the end. He's going to take manifest destiny from coast to coast by coercion. Then it names, he's called the war president in this caricature. Now, you're an artist, right? An illustrator. Do you like that? Wasn't that great the way he conveyed this? Don't criticize it now, but how we can tell stories with illustration. James Polk, he was president in these years. Up in the written box, I can't quite make it all out, but it says New Mexico, California, question, Mexico, Peru, Yucatan, and Oregon. So he's going to take manifest destiny all over, everywhere he can, even into South America. And he's going to do it by force, force people into accepting it. Going to have a great empire of progressive democracy. I don't know what it says coming out of the cannon. Here's another illustration. We have the Interior Department and we have the War Department. And this is the noble red man. And what are they doing to the noble red man? They're keeping him as an ignorant savage so that the people of America will tolerate driving him out, pushing him forth, sending him off. Well, what do the Indians think about this? Another treaty? We must move to the Indian lands. Well, they were told there were Indian lands prepared for them. Now, this was all part of this nonsense coming from the 1823 Supreme Court case of the Discovery Doctrine. They were told there were Indian lands, and they were a long ways away. Well, when they got there, they weren't too productive. It was a bad deal all the way. And then they took the lands away, and they started selling the Indian lands. Indian land for sale. Fine lands in the West. This is an original bill selling Indian lands. These men are some of the men responsible for keeping the Indians as ignorant, illiterate savages. Lewis Henry Morgan was later the director of the Smithsonian Institution. And these men John Wesley Powell was the director. These men were all influential in this Indian movement to keep them as savages. Beware of the flattery of prominent men. Beware of false educational ideas. Here we have John Wesley Powell, director of the Smithsonian, speaking out. Here it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes. If you find historic data prior to Columbus, we will just put it in a big box and hide it in the back room. We won't share that information. Isn't this interesting? What are they trying to do? They don't want to show the Indian was an intelligent person and they had a history. They don't want that to be known. Ethnology is the branch of anthropology that deals with the comparative cultures of various peoples, including folkways, etc. Ethnology. And so John Wesley Powell was a student of ethnology. This center object is a piece of stone they found in one of the mounds back east, and this stone has the Ten Commandments on it. Oh, it's a fraud, some claimed. It's not real. It couldn't have happened. And so they tried to suppress it. The Ten Commandments in block Hebrew found in America Mound were not to be used because the Smithsonian said we can't use anything that's earlier than Columbus. Hide it. Alice Beck Kehoe, Ph.D., anthropology from Harvard University, declares, there was every pressure to see the Indians as intellectually inferior. Oh, we aren't going to read that, are we? Well, that's supposed to be a hide slide. I'll just review it with you. I called an Indian named Raymond Yao. He's 80 years old. This is like just a couple of months ago. I wanted to know the rest of the story. What's going on with the Indians today? Raymond played an important part in the case that was recently enacted and still going on in Nevada. And as a Shoshone Indian rancher, he explained to me as if he were skilled like a lawyer. I was so impressed with him. Raymond just a cowboy. And he talked like a lawyer that had been trained in the highest level of law as he explained the history of the Indians and how they've been abused. Now, a little bit more maybe. The Nevada Treaty of 1863. See it right down here? The Ruby Valley Treaty. And it was enacted between the Shoshones and the federal government. And he has been back to Washington repeatedly to testify for the Indians, to represent them. The government insisted on paying for the land to then declare ownership. Now follow this one. The Indians refused. They said the land's not for sale. Do you have the right to do that? Can you keep your own land and not sell it if you don't want to? Oh, but maybe eminent domain. But they weren't even claiming eminent domain. They just offered them $25 million and thought they would accept, and the Indians refused. Well, finally the government just said, we'll just take it anyway. So they did. Carrie and Mary Dan are Shoshone Indian sisters. In 2008, this DVD came out. This adds to that Lost Civilizations of North America DVD some more detail. In 1853, the Treaty of Ruby Valley, I see there's a 10-year discrepancy between this and the previous slide, probably my error in typing it down. In 1853, the Indians living in this brown area in the middle made an agreement with the federal government that they would share a friendship treaty. They would share the land with the people that moved in. And so people started moving in, and they lived side by side. Things were going pretty well until the federal government started abusing them. A treaty of friendship. This is the actual treaty, a photograph of it. Julie Fischel is an attorney for the Indians. The old lady in the background, still alive today, at least she was a week or two ago. When I talked to Raymond Yao, two of the sisters, one had died, one was still alive. And this attorney says, a federal agency of the Department of Interior announced to me that the Treaty of Ruby Valley had been abrogated by the Western Lands Commission. Now that means the Western Lands Commission just did away. There's no more treaty. Indians didn't get involved in it. They just unilaterally, one side decided that's the end of the treaty. The attorney for Indians, Tim Coulter, declared, I was informed that the Shoshone lost their land by gradual encroachment. U.S. law says that the Indians are in a state of permanent involuntary trusteeship with no opportunity to ever change it. Now, this is current material. I'm giving you, these guys are all alive and well. This is stuff right now going on in the last 10 years in Nevada. This attorney for the Indians proclaimed, actually he's just a professor of Indian law, the discovery doctrine of 1823, invented by John Marshall, declares that the Christian discoverers own the land. The doctrine is still applied today. September 2002, the Indians had their cameras ready as the federal government invaded their land. They're coming in now with a big Gestapo-type vehicles filled with armed men, and what are they going to do? They're going to confiscate the livestock. They're going to take the horses and the cows off this federal land because the Indians are overgrazing it. Helicopters, big trucks, numerous armed policemen, ready to do whatever was necessary to confiscate their livestock because they were overgrazing it. Now watch what happens here in a minute. You won't believe it. Okay, they rounded them up. They put them in big trucks. They hauled them away. These are the horses that are, this is the next generation probably by now, the horses that are down in Fillmore, Utah. They hauled them away. Okay? These are the ones in Fillmore, Utah. This is where a goodly number, not all of them, but a goodly number, 120 of them wound up down here. Neil Ashton feeds them. Shoshone Indian horses in March of 2010. That's when we took the photo. Now, it seems interesting that gold was discovered on the Indian land that was being overgrazed. And the next thing we know, the gold industry has been given the mining rights. And they're out there today, and this is what it looks like. This is the overgrazed Indian land. Anybody want to feel like maybe there was some kind of skullduggery here? Back to James Polk in 1847. Those are the 35 slides that we cut out of the usual lectures. James Polk, a war president. He was one of the worst presidents we ever had. Not the worst, but just one of the worst. One of the things he did was invaded Mexico. Now, if we're going to have a great empire, we're going to have to go out and do some aggression. We have to take a firm hand of coercion. So he sends the United States Marine Corps down into Mexico City to take over Mexico City. Huh? What are we doing in Mexico? Beating up and killing those people. 1847, we invade Mexico. Now, I presented this lesson a few weeks ago in St. George, Cedar City area, and David Miller was in attendance. He's come to many of the lectures since then. Scott Holcomb was in attendance. Scott Holcomb, also a good supporter of liberty. Scott Holcomb says, I was a missionary in Mexico City. I have been there where the historic site is that this took place. There's a monument to the children that died in this event. Children? Yes, after the Mexican soldiers were killed, the younger generation grabbed the rifles and went up and continued the battle. Yeah. And we killed them too. What are we doing invading Mexico? It's part of the manifest destiny. It's part of the great rise to empire. James Polk was the president at the time. Rise to domestic empire. And my friend Scott Holcomb says, the people of Mexico City, when I ask them about the monument, say, we have no idea why America invaded us. Uncle Sam was overseeing this whole thing. Bigger, fatter than he was before. January 12, 1848, a 39-year-old congressman denounced President James Polk with bitterness. I read the entire speech. It is a bitter speech against James Polk. He accused Polk of usurping power and illegally invading Mexico, which of course was true. Ulysses Grant, 1879. I do not think there was ever a more wicked war than that waged by the United States on Mexico. Now, Ulysses Grant was there. He was one of the military leaders of that aggressive act. I had a horror of the Mexican War, and I have always believed that it was on our part most unjust. The wickedness was not in the way our soldiers conducted it, but in the conduct of our government in declaring war. We had no claim on Mexico. I am always ashamed of my country when I think of that invasion. Now liken that to our soldiers today, around the world, in 130 foreign countries. What are we doing there? Ulysses S. Grant, in his memoirs in 1885, couldn't let it go. He had to express it again. I was bitterly opposed to the annexation and to this day regard the Mexican War, which resulted as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory. Books are a great way to learn. Good authors doing a good job help us to get ideas, grasp concepts of the past. Mr. Lincoln Goes to War, published in 2006. There are tens of thousands of books on this subject, right here. Two authors estimate more than 50,000 books on the Civil War. I don't read books about the battles. I'm not interested in which side got up on which hill and how they shot across the valley and how many died. That is not of interest to me. I want to know why they were there and who caused it. William Marvel does a good job. History is evidence accompanied by reason and debate. In this book, Executive Power, by Benjamin Robin Curtis in 1862, he does an excellent job of explaining what was going on back then. We're quoting directly from the book. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, in time of war, I have a right to take any measure which may best subdue the enemy. Is that true? Does the president have the right to take any measure? Is that what President Obama's power is? He can do anything he wants to subdue? Nonsense. That's utter nonsense. And this author does a good job of pointing that out. 13 years after rebuking Polk for his invasion of Mexico, this man would run roughshod over the Constitution, roughshod over the entire United States, order an illegal invasion of the state of Virginia, and launch one of the maddest projects ever devised. Where'd they get that phrase? One of the maddest projects ever devised? From Alexander Hamilton. We'll quote him right here. This is an old illustration of the illegal invasion of Virginia. Alexander Hamilton in 1788, standing in the ratifying convention in New York, trying to convince the people of New York. By the way, most of the delegates in the New York convention were anti-federalist. A large percentage, and he had a job to do, Hamilton did. Anti-federalists said, we don't want the Constitution because we fear it will become a consolidated government, and the government will encroach on the rights of the people. And Alexander Hamilton is going to try and convince them that it's a great document, it will not be abused. It has been well observed that to coerce the states is one of the maddest projects that was ever devised. Can we suppose it wise to hazard a civil war? This is what he said in 1788. Not many years later, the federal government tried to coerce the states, and they brought on a civil war. The United States Congress would never contemplate marching the troops of one state into the bosom of another for any reason. This is what the ratifying convention was convinced of when they finally voted in favor of the Constitution. They believed this would actually be honored. Article 4, Section 4, the United States government shall protect each of the states against invasion, not invade them. And on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. 1861. When we study this period of history, we need to ask two questions. Why did the southern states want to leave the Union? And why did the northern states refuse to let them go? That will help us to grasp what happened. Back on the table, there's a little book by Charles Adams. What's the name of it, Steve? When in the Course of Human Events. Do you have any of them there? They all gone? Oh, I'll bring some more next time. This is the best condensed summary of this time period that I found. I've read at least 30 books on the subject, and this is like a half an inch thick and well done by a modern scholar. He gathers good information, good illustration to show this period of history. November the 19th, 1863, the 16th President of the United States delivered the preamble to the new constitutional order. Now remember the book I quoted last night. If you haven't remembered that, it might come up again. Our Secret Constitution by George Fletcher. In there he says, it's wonderful what happened during this period of history. It's wonderful because we got rid of the outdated republic and we now have the new democracy. And that's just great that happened, and his whole book's around that theme. Well, he says that these are quotes from his book, he says that the preamble to the new constitutional order was the Gettysburg Address. There's the book. Here's a quotation from it. The Civil War called forth a new constitutional order. The principles of this new legal regime are so radically different from our original Constitution, drafted in 1787, that they deserve to be recognized as a second American Constitution. Okay, we had that on the screen last night. This is an interesting read. Note, in sections 1 and 5 of the 14th Amendment, which was illegally foisted upon the states in 1868, the federal government was made superior to the states. Here's another book that I found of great interest. Yankee Leviathan. What's a Yankee? Well, that's not all. Remember, dictionaries tell us how words are used. Yes, it's a northerner, all right, but it's more than that. It's an ignorant, arrogant northerner. Now, that's different than just a northerner. It's also used to refer to a northern soldier or a member of the Union Army. So an ignorant, arrogant northerner. What's a Leviathan? A giant. So we have an ignorant, arrogant giant living in the north. That's the title of this book. The Origins of Central State Authority in America, 1859 to 1877. Richard Benzel, a very qualified historian, published by Cambridge University Press in 1990. The modern American state emerged from the wreckage of the Civil War. Folks, here we have a totally independent historian writing in another part of the world, and he says the same thing the last author said. The secession of the South and the decision of the North to attempt military reunification produced an explosive expansion of central state authority. Yeah, these people that tell me it all happened when Roosevelt passed the New Deal. No, I'll go back further than that. Okay, you under your grasp, I hope you're getting that idea. The change that took place started when the Constitution was written. We started abusing the concepts, abusing our fellow men, heaping upon them unjust and unnecessary laws. This book does a great job. I'll bring more next week. During the war between the states, a new nation was brought forth with an all-powerful federal government obliterating the sovereignty of the states. Lincoln's war to preserve the Union turned out to be a war that destroyed it. Between 1825 and 1878, something terrible happened. The government began to conquer the country. The Republic of Republics, born March the 4th, 1789, died November the 19th, 1863. All I want is political and economic dominion over our neighbors. This is a political caricature, Ben. 1900. That's just a little segment of the caricature, showing the artist trying to illustrate what happened. Domestic empire was secure. Now, what's the next level? We've got domestic empire. Where will we go from here? World empire. That's what happened. Rome, ancient Rome, how it affects you today. We've seen this picture. This is the illustration. What is that? Remember what this illustration is? The style derived from temples to mythical gods. That look like a temple to a mythical god? Anybody been there? In 1920, now don't blame it on the president. In 1920, individuals decided to create this Greco-Roman structure. It was built to an what's that big word? I didn't ever use words like that until I started reading books. Apotheosized. Yeah, what's that mean, David? I didn't know a year ago. Maybe it's 2. Apotheosized. When they built this, what is this structure? It's the Lincoln Memorial. From the reading I've done, this is an accurate statement. It was built in 1920. It illustrates the Greco-Roman structure, and it was built to an apotheosize. Let's find out what that word means. Apotheosize? To make into a god, to raise to godhood, to deify, to glorify, to idealize. Have you ever been to a funeral where they praised the guy that died and he was really a bum? You've all been there, haven't you? Oh, he was such a good man. I went to a funeral once. In fact, I was the speaker at the funeral. And I went to all the relatives. Nobody wanted to speak at the funeral. I didn't even know the guy. I was a missionary in Germany. And the mission president said, "You missionaries go and volunteer. There are people who die that don't ever get a funeral. You ought to be the preachers for those funerals." So I heard about this, and I went to the guy's family, and I went to he didn't have any friends. I couldn't find anything good about him, nothing. Except one person said finally, well, he did like dogs. So what do you say in the funeral sermon? The only thing good about this man is that he liked dogs? Well, I won't tell you the rest of the story. Apotheosize, to make into a god, to raise to godhood, deify. Example of apotheosizing. This is out of a book written about 1907 by George Edmonds. George Edmonds was a woman named Elizabeth Merriweather. But she knew that her book wouldn't be popular if she put her name on it. And so she had to put a man's name on the book. That's another part of the disgusting confronting our history. Following his death, the Republican leaders who had been venomously vituperated the living Lincoln made frantic haste to perform apotheosis and hoist their dead president to the sublime realm. Okay, so he didn't have anything to do with it. He had no man. Lincoln wasn't involved in his apotheosizing. It's other people. Who were they? They were his enemies. They were cabinet members and other people who wanted political gain. And they saw the way to get that gain would be to make him look like a great hero, greater than what he may have been. Example, Abraham Lincoln, first president of the Republican Party, the greatest, wisest, godliest man that has appeared on earth since Christ. That's called apotheosizing. That's an extract from the same book. The St. Louis Globe Democrat, was a Republican newspaper. In March of 1898, they wrote, Abraham Lincoln has long since entered the sublime realm of apotheosis. A later edition of the same newspaper included, one thing is certain, Lincoln was apotheosized after his death. Now, it's no fault of his. It was the propagandizing individuals who wanted to gain political power by this technique. This man, I was the keynote speaker in Ogden at the Lincoln Day dinner, and he was the first speaker, and he came out and said, Abraham Lincoln, first president of the Republican Party, is the greatest president that ever lived. Could that be true? You see, that's the common statement in the official literature today. We quoted Professor David Adler. If I didn't, I should. Is he maybe next? No, that's not him next. Professor David Adler, the Idaho political science professor that wrote an article rebuking what I had just said. He says, scholars today have once again confirmed this is the greatest president that ever lived. Does anybody ask, by what standard are you measuring? I couldn't resist. Recarving Rushmore. This is a good read. It'll change your whole perspective on measuring standards of how to evaluate leadership. Recarving Rushmore is not about one president, it's about all of the presidents. He just happened to get this catchy photograph. I don't know how he did that. That's pretty tricky. But he got this catchy photograph showing part of Mount Rushmore gone. I've been around Mount Rushmore several times teaching and speaking in that area. I was just out there a few weeks ago. Anyway, recarving Rushmore, ranking presidents on peace, prosperity, and liberty. I like this part of this lesson. This is good. Here's the book somebody was asking about at the lunch break. Wit and Wisdom of the American Presidents, a book of quotations, edited by Jocelyn Pine, 2001. Okay, we have two books here about presidents. This one is about what presidents did to promote peace, prosperity, and liberty by following the Constitution. And the other book is about what the president said. Is there a difference between what you say and what you do? Oh, yes, okay. Oh, I like this one too. We got to get the young people interested here. This is Rachel Dawes. Now, I've never seen a Batman movie, but I took it out of a magazine, okay? Rachel Dawes is on top of a vantage point with Bruce Wayne, Batman, and they're looking down at all the bad things, the awful situation in the city below. And Rachel Dawes turns to Batman and she says, it's not what you feel inside that counts, it's what you do that defines you. Oh dear, and so I'm going to modify that now for the situation of these two books. It's not what you say that counts, it's what you do that defines you. Would you agree with that? So if you don't do what you say, then you're not doing too well. And Batman leaps off the building, and as he flies down, Rachel can hear him muttering under his breath, it's what you do that defines you. Okay, now let's compare these two books. The book on the left is about what they did. And it measures presidents according to their peace, prosperity, and liberty, and how well they upheld the Constitution. The book on the right is about what they said. And it judges the presidents by the eloquence of their speeches and the great flowing doctrines that came from their mouths. And on the front cover of the book on the right, those that gave the greatest speeches have been illustrated. Well, now this is going to be interesting because on the left he judges by what they did, on the right by what they said. Let's do this. It is not what they said, but what they did to promote peace, prosperity, and liberty that defines them. Ranking presidents by what they did to promote peace, prosperity, and liberty by following the Constitution. Now we're going to rank them. We're going to take the books that give the ranking on what they did, and we're going to put it on top of what they said. And you get what we're trying to do here? We're going to take the highest ranking one, go in order of rank. George Washington ranked number 7 in what he did to promote peace, prosperity, and liberty. Now understand, that's one man's opinion. The one man does a good job of giving his reason why. One man's opinion is not perhaps big enough, but it's a good starting point because I think the man did a good job. Now, maybe Washington should really have been 5 instead of 7. Or maybe he should have been 9 instead of 7. Subject, we have to work that way. But he gave him a ranking of 7. That's the highest ranking of any of these men that are on the book by what they said. The next one down is, who's that? Ulysses S. Grant. He ranks number 19 according to what he did. By the way, there are only 40 presidents that got ranked 40, so we'll see out of 1 to 40. Now the next one is, oh dear, who's this? Theodore Roosevelt. He got number 21 ranking. It's just halfway in between 40 and 0 and 1. Well, the next one is, who's that? John Adams. He was ranked number 22 according to what he did to promote peace and prosperity by following the Constitution. Well, this one bothers me. I just wish he could give him a better ranking, at least 15. Anyway, Thomas Jefferson didn't do too well in this book. He made some bad choices. When he became president, he made some bad choices. And it isn't what he said, it's what he did that the man judges on. The next one is Lincoln. Oh dear. This is the man that scholars recently reconfirmed is the best president we've ever had. According to Ivan Eland, by what he did, he gets a ranking of 29. Who's that? Franklin Roosevelt. He gets a ranking of 31. Oh my, John F. Kennedy, 35? The worst is 40. And guess what we have next? 39. Harry Truman. And who do you think gets number 40 ranking? The worst president by what he did? Woodrow Wilson. Okay. I thought that was interesting. So here on the cover of the book, what they said, they are all great, great speakers, but what they did was quite different. Ancient Rome. This is another intriguing piece. What is this little doodad up in the corner here? Well, this is the symbol, this fasces, symbolized the unification of the people under a single government. The axe suggested what would happen to anyone who didn't obey the government. See the axe tied to the side? The Roman fasces is the origin of the word fascism. That's very interesting. So what's that got to do with the lesson? What's this right here? Anybody recognize that coin? 1937 dime. Yeah. Did it? What's that doing on our dime? This is the symbol of unity by coercion. We use the axe if necessary, and we will bind you together with a blood-red cord. Oh, that's very interesting. Well, e pluribus unum, what's that mean? Out of many we will compel you to be one. Very thought-provoking. What's this? This is Congress. This is the halls of Congress. And right in the back there we see the speaker stand. Take a straight-in look at the speaker stand. See what's on the sides, left and right of the speaker? You see it there? Yeah. What's that doing in the halls of Congress? We're going to hold them together with coercion, with a blood-red cord, and use an axe if necessary? That's what the symbol symbolizes. The Roman symbol. This is the symbol that was carried in front of Caesar when Caesar was taken in his big sedan chair down the freeway. And the people would march in front of him carrying the fasces to show he was the all-powerful leader, going to hold them together by force. That's where the symbol comes from. Most interesting. What in the world is it doing here? Now, I haven't given you all of it by far. I'm just giving you a little bit of evidence that we were changing. We were changing to a great, powerful central government by coercion. Why do you suppose the designers of the Lincoln Memorial placed the Roman symbol for union by coercion under the hands of Abraham Lincoln? Roman law versus natural law. Hamilton's summary, his beliefs are all-powerful central government. Now, this quotation is attributed to Hamilton, but some of the authors claim that he didn't make it. If it's not his statement, at least he supports this basic belief. I have read the entire book, The Ideas of Alexander Hamilton. It's a nice, thick book, speeches only, letters, and the entire document's giving Hamilton's viewpoint. This fits his viewpoint. I tell you, people are a great beast. In other words, we want to have the aristocracy run the country, not the common people. Jefferson, on the other hand, believed the right of the people to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. Where does that come from? Declaration of Independence. This is Jefferson's feeling. Hamiltonism is Roman law. Here are some of Alexander Hamilton's basic beliefs. Create a strong central government similar to that of England. The main public offices were to be held by the rich and noble for long periods or for life. Maintain a large standing army. Provide for a national bank and heavy public debt, owned by the favored few, to whom the common masses should pay tribute under the guise of interest. Hamilton would really be pleased today. Enact prohibitive tariffs under the guise of protection. Now, these are out of the 1907 book by Elizabeth Merriweather. Jeffersonism, based on natural law. The sovereign power rests in the people. Establish a written constitution based upon natural law and consent of the governed. Assign to the central government only specific enumerated powers. Uphold and defend the Constitution strictly and change it only by amendment. That's the viewpoint I uphold and believe in. That's written and taken from the book I worked on, The Making of America. In questions of power, then, let no more be said of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. A view of the Constitution, chapter 32 of the Permanence of the Union. Some of this is review from last night. What is the Union? The Union is a voluntary association of the people of two or more representative republics. The Union is made up of willing states. Senator Wendell Phillips, the Republican in New York, said in 1860, it is made up of willing states. To coerce a seceding state would be suicidal to freedom. It has been well observed that to coerce the states is one of the maddest projects that was ever devised. Unionolatry developed, a worship of the Union. Serve King Union, they declared.